Shred everything in Cabinet 7, Dominic said without looking up from his phone. Already halfway out the door, his footsteps receding down the marble corridor, before Elowen could confirm she'd heard him correctly. She stood in the archive room with its rows of gray metal filing cabinets and its single flickering fluorescent tube overhead, the kind of light that turned everyone's skin the color of old paper. Cabinet 7. She pulled on the handle and it came open with the particular reluctant groan of something that hadn't been touched in years, exhaling a breath of dust and dried ink, and something underneath that she couldn't name. Something cold, the way old promises smell when they've been kept in the dark too long. She was supposed to simply shred, that was the job. Elowen Marsh, administrative coordinator for Caldwell Property Holdings, was very good at doing exactly what she was supposed to do. She had perfected it over 3 years of near invisibility, wearing her oversized charcoal cardigans and her faded navy trousers like a uniform of disappearance, keeping her dark hair pulled back into a knot that announced she was not asking to be looked at. She was the woman who arrived before everyone else and left after everyone else, who refilled the printer and ordered the ink, and quietly fixed the spreadsheets that the senior analysts broke and never said a word about it. She was background noise in human form, and she had worked very hard to stay that way. She lifted the first accordion folder and carried it toward the industrial shredder in the corner. She set it down. She lifted the second. And then, because she was who she was, because the particular kind of intelligence that had driven her to finish an accounting degree at 22 and a forensic financial analysis certification at 24, did not know how to stop noticing patterns, she paused. The tab on the third folder read, Orvieto 2019. It should have meant nothing. It was a property holding name, presumably. She dealt with property holding names every day. But the folder was sealed with a strip of red tape that the others did not have, and the handwriting on the tab was not the same typeface printed label format used on everything else in this cabinet. Someone had written that name by hand. Someone had wanted to remember what was in here without it appearing in any system. Elowen Marsh stood alone in the flickering light, holding a folder she had been told to destroy, and she made the choice that would change everything. She broke the red seal and she read. The number on the first page was $47 million. The name beneath it was Lucian Caldwell. She did not shred it. She put it in her bag. She told herself it was only so she could understand what she was destroying. She told herself that, very firmly, the way a person tells themselves things that are not entirely true. And she went back to her desk and she opened the folder under the cover of a thick stack of quarterly reports, and she began to read in earnest, and the room around her went very quiet, the way rooms do when the information inside them finally finds the person capable of understanding it. The documents described a contract. It was dated November 14, 2019. It was not a property contract. It was a debt assignment. $47 million, transferred from a holding company called Meridian Collective Limited to Caldwell Property Holdings, with conditions attached. Conditions written in the kind of language that looks like standard boilerplate until you have the specific training to see what it actually means. Elowen had that training. She read the conditions 3 times. Then she sat very still for a long moment and she thought about what it meant that she was the only person in this building who could read this document and understand what she was looking at. What she was looking at was leverage. Specifically, it was leverage that someone inside Caldwell Property Holdings had been holding over Lucian Caldwell for 5 years. The conditions weren't protecting the company. They were protecting whoever had structured the debt. If Lucian defaulted on even one scheduled payment, defined in paragraph 7 with a precision so surgical it almost qualified as elegant, then controlling interest in Caldwell Property Holdings transferred automatically and irrevocably to Meridian Collective, not through litigation, not through board vote, automatically. The word appeared 4 times. She counted. She knew the name Meridian Collective. She had processed invoices from them for 18 months, without understanding what she was looking at. They appeared in the accounts as a consulting firm. They were not a consulting firm. She had suspected this for approximately 16 months, without letting herself follow the thought to its conclusion, because following thoughts to their conclusions in this building was not something a person did if they intended to remain employed and uninteresting. But the folder was in her bag, and the folder told a story. And the story had a villain, and the villain's name was on the 3rd page, and it was not a name she recognized from the regular flow of paperwork. It was a name she recognized from a different kind of memory, from a Thursday morning 8 months ago when she had been refilling the coffee station near the East Conference Room, and 2 men she had never seen before had a conversation they would not have had if they had noticed her standing there. They had not noticed her. People rarely did. The name one of them had said was Ferrante. She sat at her desk with the quarterly reports stacked around her like a small fortress, and she thought about Dominic telling her to shred Cabinet 7, and she thought about the fact that Dominic had access to Cabinet 7 and presumably knew what was in it. And she thought about the way Lucian Caldwell had looked the last time she had been in the same room with him. She thought about him more than she should, and she knew it. She had catalogued her awareness of him the way she catalogued everything that presented a risk to her peace, quietly, methodically, with a kind of resigned precision. Lucian Caldwell was 6 feet 3 inches of absolute stillness in a black suit, and every room he entered rearranged itself around him the way a magnetic field rearranges iron filings, without drama and without asking permission. He had dark hair that he wore swept back from the sharp planes of his face, and his eyes were the precise color of deep water at night. And he spoke so rarely and at such low volume that when he did speak, the air pressure in the room changed. She had been in his direct line of sight twice in 3 years. Both times she had looked immediately at the floor. She had approximately 4 hours before end of business. She pulled up her personal encrypted drive, the one she maintained for her own financial work, and she began building a model. She needed to know when the next scheduled payment was due. She needed to know if it had been made. She needed to know if someone had been deliberately engineering a default. The payment was due in 9 days. She pulled the accounts payable records. She cross-referenced the payment history. She found what she had been afraid she would find, and then she found something worse, and she sat with her hands flat on the desk for a moment, and breathed through her nose, and told herself to be calm. Someone had been skimming from the operating accounts for 14 months. The amounts were small enough individually to evade the automated alerts, siphoned through a cascade of subsidiary accounts that appeared legitimate at the vendor level, but dissolved into a shell structure at the second remove. 14 months, approximately $2.3 million. Elowen had detected the pattern in 11 minutes, which meant it had been designed to evade someone with a lower skill set than hers, or someone who wasn't looking. No one had been looking. She had not been looking either, not directly, not until tonight, not until a red-sealed folder had told her to. The skimming alone wouldn't trigger the default. But combined with a single structural irregularity she found in the 3rd quarter reconciliation, an error that was almost certainly not an error, a reclassification of a revenue item that moved approximately $800,000 from the operating account to a reserve account that sat, notably, outside the coverage calculation defined in paragraph 7 of the Orvieto contract. Combined with that, the default threshold was exactly $612,000 away. 9 days. She closed the quarterly reports. She put her hands in her lap. She thought about what it meant to do nothing. She thought about what it meant to take this to someone. She thought about Dominic and his phone, and his retreating footsteps, and the red-sealed folder he had told her to destroy without opening. Elowen Marsh had spent 3 years being invisible, and for 3 years that invisibility had been armor. She had worn it the way she wore her oversized cardigans, not because she was cold, but because she had learned early and painfully that taking up space was an invitation for cruelty, and she had stopped issuing invitations. She was a large woman who moved through small spaces with deliberate apology, who had learned to make her soft, substantial body as unnoticeable as possible, who ate her lunch alone at her desk and did not attend the company holiday parties, and did not ask for the raises she was owed, and did not, under any circumstances, request a private meeting with Lucian Caldwell. She requested a private meeting with Lucian Caldwell. She sent the meeting request to his assistant at 4:47 p.m., marked urgent, with the subject line, Orvieto 2019, time-sensitive financial concern. She did not let herself think about it after she sent it. She gathered her folders. She went to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror under the harsh fluorescent light, the fullness of her face, the broad curve of her shoulders, the way her cardigan hung off her frame like a tent someone had surrendered in, and she said to her own reflection, quietly and without drama, that it didn't matter how she looked. What mattered was the $612,000 and the 9 days and the name Ferrante. She went back to her desk. At 5:03 p.m., his assistant replied. 6 o'clock, his office. She had never been inside his office. In 3 years, she had crossed the threshold of the executive floor exactly once, to deliver a physical document when the courier had called in sick, and she had stood in the reception area with her eyes down and her cardigan pulled across her chest, and she had handed over the envelope and retreated to the elevator as quickly as she decently could. The carpet on the executive floor was the color of dark charcoal. The lighting was warm, amber-toned, the kind that was specifically engineered to make you feel observed. She felt observed now, standing at the glass door of his office at exactly 6 o'clock, watching his assistant nod and gesture for her to go in. The door opened. She stepped inside. The room was large and dark-paneled and smelled of sandalwood and something colder underneath it, something that moved in the air like a current. Lucian Caldwell was behind his desk, his jacket still on, his tie still perfect, and he was looking at her. He was looking at her the way she had always been afraid someone would look at her, with absolute full attention, nothing held back, eyes moving across her face and then, deliberately, down and then up again, the way you look at something you are cataloging for future reference. She felt heat climb her throat. She gripped her folder. "Elowen Marsh," he said. His voice was exactly what she had spent 3 years steeling herself against from a safe distance, low and resonant, a sound that arrived in the chest before it registered in the ears. Accounting. "Forensic financial analysis," she said, and then immediately wished she had simply confirmed accounting, because correcting him was not the strategy she had planned, and she had absolutely planned a strategy. "I apologize. Yes, administrative coordination. I also have a background in forensic accounting, which is relevant to why I asked for this meeting." He did not tell her to sit down. He watched her stand there, this woman in her oversized cardigan with her folder clutched to her chest, and his face was entirely unreadable. She had heard people describe Lucian Caldwell's face as a closed room, and now she understood what they meant. There was no cruelty in it and no warmth, only an absolute watchfulness, like something that had learned patience by necessity rather than nature. "You read the Orvieto contract," he said. It was not a question. Her heart stopped for 1 full second. Then it resumed. "Yes. I know I was told to shred it. I didn't shred it. I read it instead, and then I read 14 months of accounts payable records and your third-quarter reconciliation, and I need to show you what I found, because there are 9 days before the default threshold is triggered, and I believe it is being engineered deliberately." She said all of this in one breath, the way you say things when you know that stopping will mean you don't finish. Her voice only shook on the last 4 words. He was quiet for a moment. The room was very quiet. Then he said, "Close the door." She had already closed it behind her. Something moved through his expression. It was not quite surprise. It was the particular look of a man recalibrating. He stood from behind the desk. He was even taller standing, his frame absorbing the warm amber light of the office and casting a shadow that reached the far wall, and he said, "Show me." She put the folder on his desk. She opened it. She talked. She talked for 22 minutes, laying out the structure of the debt assignment, the cascade of the skimming operation, the reclassification irregularity, the deliberate proximity to the default threshold. She heard her own voice grow steadier as the data took over, as the numbers and the patterns became the thing she was standing behind instead of the thing she was holding in front of her. And she watched Lucian Caldwell's face as she talked, and she watched the quality of his attention deepen from watchfulness into something that she could not name, but that made her grip the edge of the desk harder. When she finished, the silence lasted 9 seconds. She counted. "Who else have you told?" he said. "No one." "Dominic told you to shred it?" "Yes." The pause between them stretched. She watched him look at the third page of the folder, the page with the name on it, and she watched what happened to the angles of his face. The stillness did not break. It deepened. It became the kind of stillness that precedes motion, rather than the kind that follows it. "Ferrante," he said, very quietly, to no one in particular. "The name appeared in a conversation I overheard 8 months ago," she said, "near the East Conference Room. I didn't report it because I couldn't connect it to anything specific at the time. I should have reported it, I know." He looked up from the page, and he looked at her, and this time the quality of his gaze was different from before. Before it had been cataloging, now it was something else, something that settled on her with a weight she was not accustomed to, something that made her want to pull her cardigan tighter across her chest except that her hands were flat on the desk and she couldn't. "You found this in 11 minutes, he said. She had mentioned that detail in her presentation without thinking. She felt heat in her face. The structure wasn't designed to evade someone with the specific training to... "In 11 minutes, he said again. It was not a criticism. She could not identify what it was. "I should go," she said. "You'll want to contact someone about the..." "Sit down, Elowen." She sat down. Not because he said it like an order, though it was one. She sat down because her legs were suddenly unreliable, and because no one in this building had said her first name to her in so long that hearing it in his voice did something to the structure of her composure that she could not immediately repair. He walked to the window. The city was dark behind the glass, the lights of it spread out below like a second set of stars. He put one hand in his jacket pocket and stood there for a moment, and she watched his shoulders, the extraordinary width of them, the way the black suit lay across them without a wrinkle, the controlled tension of a man who was thinking at full capacity and choosing to reveal none of it. "You took this from the archive," he said, "rather than shredding it, because you read accounting patterns the way most people don't read anything." "Yes. You built a model in an afternoon. I had the data. My analysts have had the same data for 14 months. She did not respond to that. It was not her place to comment on the competence of colleagues who had never noticed she existed, even if she had been quietly patching their errors for 2 years. He turned from the window. He looked at her across the length of his office, her in her gray cardigan and her faded trousers, sitting on the edge of the chair like someone prepared to be dismissed, her folder of devastatingly precise financial intelligence open on his desk. "You were going to shred it," he said. "You chose not to. I couldn't destroy something I didn't understand. Most people can. I know. I'm not most people." She heard herself say it and was immediately afraid of how it sounded, like arrogance, like overreaching, like claiming space she hadn't been allotted. She opened her mouth to soften it. He spoke first. "No," he said, "you're not." The amber light of the office fell differently after that. She wasn't certain what had changed in the air of the room, but something had. some shift in the current that she felt before she understood it, and she looked at her folder instead of his face and tried to remember that what mattered here was the $612,000 and the 9 days. Dominic, she said carefully. If he instructed the shredding, then either he was acting on bad information about what was in Cabinet 7 or he knew. Lucian said it without visible emotion. He's been with me for 11 years. She said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. 11 years was a different kind of loss than money. I need you to do something for me, he said. He crossed to the desk, and he sat on the edge of it rather than behind it, which put him closer to her than she had been prepared for. The warmth of him, the smell of sandalwood and cold air, the sheer density of his physical presence at this proximity. She kept her eyes on the folder. The skimming accounts, you said the structure cascades through subsidiary vendors. Yes, 3 remove layers. At the 3rd, remove the funds land in a real estate LLC registered in Liechtenstein. Can you reverse engineer the structure and freeze the end accounts before they're swept? She looked up at him. He was watching her with that full attention stillness, waiting, and the proximity of him made her heart do something architectural, a structural shift, something load-bearing giving slightly. Technically, yes. Legally, it would require... I'll handle legally. I'm asking about technically. Then yes, if I have access to the full accounts architecture and a direct banking API link, I can build a dead man's switch in the payment structure that freezes the downstream accounts the moment any single transaction in the cascade tries to move. They wouldn't be able to sweep $1 without triggering it. And then I can use the frozen funds as... She stopped. She was doing it again, following a thought to its conclusion, without first checking whether the room wanted her to. I'm sorry, you didn't ask for the full strategy. Finish the sentence, he said. She finished it. As a counter-leverage instrument against whoever holds the beneficial interest in Meridian Collective, if we freeze their funds and file the concurrent UCC claims simultaneously, we don't just prevent the default, we reverse the debt assignment. The Orvieto contract becomes unenforceable, and the controlling interest transfer clause is void. 9 seconds of silence. She was counting again. You just described defeating a 5-year play in a single counter move, he said. The structure was vulnerable. They built it to execute, not to withstand scrutiny. They never expected anyone to read the contract before shredding it. No, Lucian said, they didn't. His voice had dropped, become something quieter, and she felt it resonate in a different register, below the professional logic of the last 40 minutes, somewhere that was not accounting or strategy or forensic analysis at all. They expected invisibility. She looked at her hands, the folder, the desk, anywhere that was not his face at this distance. I should give you everything digitally and let you bring in someone more appropriate to. You're not going anywhere. He said it simply, the same register he used for every declarative statement, and yet the sentence did not feel like a business order. It felt like something being established. You're going to build the dead man's switch, tonight, if possible. I'll have my IT architect give you root access to the account system within the hour. She nodded. She began to gather the folder. Elowen. She went still, his voice at her name again, that low, unhurried sound. When this is resolved, you and I are going to have a second conversation about why it took 3 years for me to learn that you existed. She stood up. She was a full woman, substantial and soft, and she felt the full weight of herself in that moment, the breadth of her hips, the roundness of her arms, the way she occupied space in his amber-lit office with her gray cardigan and her demolished composure. And she said, very evenly, I made sure you didn't. Something altered in his face. It was brief and it was deep, like a seismic shift that doesn't reach the surface. I know, he said. That stops tonight. She walked to the door. She was 3 feet from it when his voice came again, quiet as everything he said, and yet it stopped her as completely as a hand on the shoulder. They'll try to stop you when they realize what you're doing. Ferrante's people are inside this building. She turned. She looked at him across the full length of his office, this large, unhidden woman with her folder and her training, and the particular courage that comes not from fearlessness, but from having calculated the cost of cowardice. "Then don't take too long deciding what to do about Dominic," she said. He was still watching her when she closed the door. The account's architecture was more complex than even her model had prepared her for. She worked from a secured workstation in the empty IT partition, with a cold cup of coffee at her elbow, and the building darkening around her floor by floor as the night deepened. And she built the dead man's switch with the methodical precision that she gave to every problem that mattered. Each line of code checked twice. Each payment trigger tested against the subsidiary structure. Each freeze parameter calibrated so that the moment any single linked account attempted a transfer above $2,000, the entire cascade locked simultaneously, irrevocably, without warning. She was deep in the third cascade layer when the door to the IT partition opened behind her. She did not turn. She assumed it was the IT architect Lucian had sent earlier. She heard 2 sets of footsteps, not one, and she heard the quality of them, the particular weight distribution of men who were not walking in their natural gait, men who had slowed themselves down deliberately, and she knew before she turned that this was not the IT architect. Dominic was in the doorway. Behind him was a man she did not know, broad-shouldered in a gray suit, with the kind of eyes that had decided something before they finished looking at you. "Elowen," Dominic said. He sounded genuinely regretful, which was somehow worse than if he had been cold. "I need you to step away from that terminal." She did not step away from the terminal. Her hands were on the keyboard. The dead man's switch was 91% built. "I know what you think you've found," Dominic said, taking one step forward, "and I need you to understand that whatever Lucian told you tonight, the situation is more complicated than a single set of documents. You don't know what this company owes certain people. You don't know what Lucian has agreed to. I know what's in paragraph 7, she said. Her voice was steady. I know what default means, and I know that whatever Lucian agreed to, he didn't agree to you." The man behind Dominic moved. He moved with the efficiency of someone trained for it, crossing the room in 3 strides, and she had 9% of the switch left to build, and she calculated in the half-second before he reached her that 9% was not enough, and she hit the execute command on the 89% she had, and grabbed the monitor with both hands and yanked it off the desk so that it crashed to the floor between them, and she was on her feet and backing toward the fire door before the man recovered his footing. "Elowen," Dominic's voice had changed. The regret was gone. "The terminal has the session running. He can complete whatever you started." "No," she said from the fire door, "he can't. Because what I built requires biometric authentication at execution, and I registered my fingerprint as the sole authenticator before I started the session, and the system is currently in a 48-hour lockout because I triggered the wrong user failsafe when I knocked it over." She looked at the man in the gray suit, who was looking at the monitor on the floor with an expression of mounting comprehension. "You have 89% of a dead man's switch, and no way to complete or reverse it. And in 48 hours, every account in that cascade is going to lock permanently, unless I come back and finish the last 11% myself." The silence was extraordinary. Dominic looked at her with something she was not entirely prepared for, even now. Not rage, but a kind of unwilling respect that he could not keep entirely off his face. Then he looked past her, toward the fire door, and his expression changed completely. She heard the door open behind her, and she felt the shift in the air, that particular drop in temperature, that rearrangement of the room's field, and she did not turn around, because she already knew. "Dominic," Lucian said, from directly behind her left shoulder. His voice was exactly the same as it was in every other context. Low, unhurried, conversational. The calmness was not reassurance. It was the opposite of reassurance. "You have 20 seconds to explain why you're in the same room as my analyst at 11 o'clock at night." Dominic opened his mouth. "Don't tell me about Ferrante," Lucian said. "I know about Ferrante. I've known about Ferrante for 6 weeks. I didn't know about you." A pause, the length of a held breath. "That was my failure. It won't happen twice." The man in the gray suit looked between Lucian and the door and made the calculation that anyone with functioning self-preservation instincts would make, which was that the door was the better option. He did not reach the door. There were 2 men who arrived from somewhere Elowen had not registered, who moved with the kind of quiet efficiency that redefined her understanding of who else had been in this building tonight, and the man in the gray suit ceased to be a variable. Dominic said very quietly, "Lucian." 20 seconds, Lucian said. "You've used 15. What Dominic said in the remaining 5 seconds was not a justification. It was a name, and an amount, and something about family, and it landed in the room without changing anything, the way confessions do when the person hearing them has already moved past the point where explanations matter. "I'll have Marcus take you downstairs," Lucian said. "You won't be harmed. What happens after tonight is a conversation for attorneys." He paused. "We were friends, Dominic. That's the only reason attorneys are involved." After they were gone, the IT partition was very quiet. Elowen was standing with her back against the fire door, and her heart running at a rate she was not going to mention to anyone, and the monitor was on the floor, and the workstation was running its lockout clock in the corner of her vision, and Lucian Caldwell was 6 feet away from her, in the dim glow of the remaining monitors, looking at her with that deep-water gaze. "You triggered the failsafe deliberately," he said. "I needed 48 hours. You could have run. The switch was 89% complete. If I ran, the cascade stayed unlocked. I needed them to believe the leverage was already in place. It isn't. No, but they don't know what I can and can't build. They expected someone who would panic." She was still pressed against the fire door. She became aware of this, of the fact that she was presenting herself as someone who needed the door behind her, and she straightened up and stepped away from it, bringing herself to her full height, letting her body occupy the space it occupied. She was a large woman in a gray cardigan in a dim room, and she was done making herself smaller. "I need 40 minutes to finish the switch, and I need you to make sure no one else comes through that door." He was quiet for a moment. Then he moved, not toward her, but toward the door she had just stepped away from, positioning himself between it and the room in a way that was not dramatic and not performed, just final, the way gravity is final. 40 minutes, he said. She sat down. She opened the session. She built the remaining 11%. She was 12 minutes into the final sequence when she became aware that he was watching her work, that he had been watching her for the last several minutes with a quality of attention that had nothing to do with the technical problem on the screen. She felt it along the back of her neck, across her shoulders, the places her body had always tried hardest to disappear. She kept her eyes on the terminal. "You corrected the format in my Q2 summary," he said. Her hands paused on the keyboard. 2 years ago, he continued, his voice the same low, unhurried current, the methodology footnote. Someone changed the reference structure so it would actually hold up to the external audit. That was you. She resumed typing. The original formatting wouldn't have passed the auditor's citation standards. "My analysts have been submitting my reports for 3 years. You fixed it in the margins, anonymously. It was a small thing. Elowen." She stopped typing. "Turn around." She turned around. He was still at the door, but he had turned to face her, and the dim monitor light fell across his face and did the thing she had been afraid of. which was make him completely visible. The hard line of his jaw, the dark depth of his eyes, the particular expression that she was looking at directly for the first time, which was not patience or demand but something she did not have armor against. "You have been carrying this building for 3 years," he said, "in a gray cardigan, so that no one would look at you." She held the edge of the desk. It was a practical decision. It was a crime. He said it quietly, without theater, not a metaphor. "What was done to you, to make you believe that disappearing was practical, that's the thing I'm interested in." The terminal blinked at her. She had 8 minutes of work left. She turned back to it because she needed to finish the switch, and because looking at his face while he said things like that was not compatible with the functioning of her hands. "You don't need to be interested in that," she said. "You need to let me finish this. Both can be true." She finished the switch. She executed the final authentication. The cascade locked. Across 17 subsidiary accounts in 4 jurisdictions, $42 million went perfectly, permanently, irrevocably still, the way water goes still when you put a lid on it, the way a threat stops being a threat when someone takes away its teeth. She sat back in the chair. Her hands were trembling. She had not noticed them trembling until they stopped. She looked at them, and then she put them in her lap. "It's done," she said. He crossed the room. Not quickly, nothing he did was quick, but steadily, with that particular intentionality, and he crouched beside her chair, so that his face was level with hers, which was not something she had expected, and which dismantled the last reliable structure of her composure in a single motion. She looked at him. She could not look away. "You threw the monitor to buy yourself leverage," he said. "Yes." "You sat back down and finished the work." "Yes. While I was in the room. You said you'd keep the door clear. I trusted that." He was very close. The sandalwood smell of him was in her breathing. His eyes moved across her face, slowly, without apology, the way he had looked at her from behind his desk earlier tonight, but different now, the cataloging gone, replaced by something unguarded that made her want to close her eyes. His hand came up and rested on the arm of her chair, not touching her, just present there, large and still. "I have had 12 people work this building's accounts for 5 years," he said. "I have had analysts and forensic contractors and internal audit teams. None of them found what you found in 11 minutes. He paused, because none of them were invisible. The architect of this structure counted on visibility. He counted on people who announce themselves, who ask for access, who file requests. He didn't count on you. Another pause, lower now. "I didn't count on you either. That was my failure. I already told you. It won't happen twice." She needed to say something practical. She needed to say something about the UCC filings and the banking notification and the 9 days that were now irrelevant because the default mechanism was frozen. She said, "I owe you 11 months of raises." He looked at her for one unguarded second. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile exactly, something drier and more deliberate. "Did you just invoice me?" "I've been calculating it for about 8 months," she said. "It's $73,000. He held her gaze, itemized. "I can have the spreadsheet to you by morning." The not quite smile deepened by approximately 2 millimeters. Then it settled back into stillness, and the stillness became the other thing again, the thing without a category, and he said, very quietly, "You're not going back to that office in a gray cardigan." She felt the heat rise in her face, her throat, the soft curve of her shoulders. She looked at the desk. "My clothes are camouflage," he said. "You wore them so that when a man looked at you, he would see nothing worth keeping. You made yourself nothing worth keeping." He waited until she looked back at him. She looked back at him. "You were wrong," he said, "about what you are." His eyes traveled down once, unhurried, completely deliberate. making no apology for it, and then back up to her face. About what I see when I look at you. She was not, she told herself, going to cry in the IT partition at 11:47 p.m. after building a multi-jurisdictional financial dead man's switch. She was not. You don't have to do that, she said. I'm not doing anything, he said. I'm telling you the truth. There's a difference. He stood. He held out his bare hand, no gloves, no distance, and she looked at it for a moment, this large, steady hand extended toward her in the monitor light, and she took it, and he helped her to her feet. And when she was standing, she was close enough to him that she had to look up, and she was a tall woman, and she was not accustomed to looking up, and the experience of it rearranged something in her chest. The UCC filings need to go out in the morning, she said, because she was who she was. They will, he said. And someone needs to contact the banking regulators about the Liechtenstein LLC before Elowen. Yes, I will handle every single thing that needs handling. He had not let go of her hand, except the $73,000. That I'll let you handle. She breathed. The room was very quiet. The monitor screens cast their dim blue glow across the wreck of the evening, and the folder on the floor, and the terminated career of a man who had been trusted for 11 years, and underneath all of it, running clean and precise as the code she had written, was the particular feeling of being seen by someone who had decided, with complete and unhurried certainty, that what they saw was something to keep. The cardigan, she said, is very comfortable. I'll buy you 100 cardigans, he said, in every color that isn't gray. He held her gaze. Starting tomorrow. She thought about tomorrow. She thought about walking into this building without camouflage, about letting her body take up the space it took up, about the particular terror and the particular relief of being visible. She thought about a folder in a cabinet with a red seal, and a choice she had made in a flickering fluorescent light, and the way a single sentence, "You're not most people," could arrive in a life and change the acoustics of every room you walked into after. She thought about Lucian Caldwell holding her hand in the glow of the monitors she had saved his company with, and she thought that she had been wrong, all these years, about the cost of being seen. The cost was not what she had been told it was. She looked up at him. He was already looking at her. He had been looking at her, she suspected, with this precise quality of attention, for longer than tonight, longer than the hour she had stood at his desk with her folder and her terrified precision, longer perhaps than she would know how to account for, until she had the receipts. Lucian, she said. His name in her mouth was new and exact. Elowen, he said. And the room was warm, and the switch was built, and the threat was over, and she was standing in the full, unhidden weight of herself in the circle of his attention, and not one part of her was disappearing. If this story got under your skin, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like Elowen's. Share it with someone who deserves a reminder that the woman in the background is usually the one holding everything together. Subscribe so you never miss a new story, and drop a comment below telling us which moment hit you hardest. Was it the 11 minutes? The $73,000, or the 100 cardigans in every color that isn't gray? We read every single one.